Hello, and welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. October has been absolutely crazy. I haven't been able to record anything this past month besides my September wrap-up, which at this point I haven't even finished editing, so I'm so sorry for not being active on this channel for the entirety of October. Whatever. It's fine, it's fine. I forgive myself, and I hope you do too. But anyways, welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. Today, I am going to be going through all the books that I read in the month of October. This month I read 20 books, but I'm actually going to be talking about 21 because today, the 1st of November, I finished a book that I read like 85% of in October, so I was like, might as well talk about it now. And I think usually in my wrap-ups I go from like the beginning of the month to the end of the month in terms of the order in which I talk about the books. But this month I will be going from most recently read to the earliest read books. And to be honest, I tried to stick to horror, thriller, mystery type stuff, but I ended up DNFing a couple thrillers. I honestly don't even remember what they are anymore. You can check my Goodreads. You can friend me on Goodreads if you would like. It's always in the link in the description below, but on Goodreads I always like note, and I have like a list on my shelves of books that I DNF'd in. Anyway, so today I'm just going to be talking about all the books that I read in October as well as the one that I finished today, literally earlier today. So let's just get started. The book that I want to talk about first is All's Well by Mona Awad. This is a book that I finished today and I kind of absolutely loved it. Like, it kind of blew me away in a good way. I rated it 5 stars. So I really enjoyed this book. Speaking of Mona Awad, I know that she has written a couple other books. I think her first book was 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, I'm pretty sure, and her other book was Bunny, that everyone was talking about last year, or maybe the year before that. I don't remember. Everyone loved that fucking book. I couldn't finish it. Like, I DNF'd it, I'm pretty sure, but yeah, it wasn't for me. But this book, All's Well, it totally 100% was. Books and Lala talked about how if you really liked the book Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder, you would really like All's Well by Mona Awad, and I think she made a really good call on that, because I did love Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder, and I also loved All's Well, and I do see the similarities there. However, I think that All's Well was a book that I enjoyed more than Night Bitch, because Night Bitch was a book that focused mostly on motherhood. I talked about this in my September wrap-up, which should be the most recently uploaded thing that you guys will see. And it's all about motherhood and the joys and pains of it, and the magical realism that sort of evolves from that. In All's Well, we're talking about chronic pain and academia, mostly, and like theater. And as like a theater person, as like a liberal arts East Coast academic type of vibes person, I loved this book. I ate that shit up. And because it was ultimately about like women's pain, women's suffering, and the ways that medical systems and social groups and institutions and relationships ultimately like really suffer from chronic pain and chronic illness, I thought it was really fantastically done with. But as someone who doesn't really suffer from like a debilitating sort of illness, I can't really speak to that representation particularly, but how this book dealt with it in terms of the magical realism, I was obsessed with. It was very gritty and dark and gloomy, but in a way that I really enjoyed. But it was still also like uplifting in some ways, and it felt like justice was served in a lot of ways. We're following our main character, who is an English professor, but she sort of heads the theater department, which is like a tiny part of the English department, and it doesn't get much funding, and she, like I said, suffers from chronic pain. She used to be a stage actor, but that career ended when she fell off the stage when she was playing the protagonist in Shakespeare's play All's Well That Ends Well, because she fell off the stage at the end and it like fucked up her back and her leg and her foot, and it's been that way, so she had to stop acting, and so now she's like in this position that she kind of hates. Like, she hates her job. All of her kids, all of her students are people that she can barely stand. And now she's trying, every year she puts on, she's the director of a Shakespeare play, Shakespeare production. And this year she wants to do All's Well That Ends Well. And there's something like interesting going on in terms of the way that she's trying to like live out her past again. But her entire cast of students is kind of like rebelling against her. They don't want to do All's Well That Ends Well because it's not as dramatic as they want. It's not as dramatic or fun as like Macbeth or whatever. So they really are not a fan of it. And not only that, but because she suffers from chronic pain, her best friend and her only friend, because her ex-husband, like, she has a weird relationship with him because she was the one who left him, but she always drunkenly calls him. And so she has very interesting and weird relationships with everyone in her life, and they're all very tense. And she is very lonely and like lacks intimacy in her life due to the way that her pain has like isolated her severely. And throughout the course of this book, she ends up meeting these 3 men at a bar one night, and they give her this thing called, they like, the bartender pours her a drink called Golden Remedy. And then when she drinks it, weird stuff starts happening. Her pain just starts to go away, and then all of a sudden, like, stuff starts happening around her that is very bizarre. One of her students is this, like, really bitchy girl who, like, has had everything handed to her on, like, a silver platter, basically. She was cast as the main character in All's Well because her parents are, like, donors to the school. Our professor person does not like her and doesn't want her to be the main character because she thinks another girl in the department is like a much more better actress and like better suited for the role. And then all of a sudden the girl that she hates like starts getting sick, and then all of a sudden there's these like donors, these anonymous donors who donate a bunch of money to the English department and sort of demand that the strings attached to that money is putting on specifically All's Well That Ends Well as a Shakespeare play, instead of the sort of plays that her students want to do instead. So basically, all this stuff starts happening, and it's a really interesting blend of like magical realism and literary fiction, and that sort of like New England, liberal arts, academia setting, theater background stuff, and then the Shakespeare parts. Like, there's so many characters that works as foils for each other, and this book also kind of operates as a retelling of the play, obviously. But yeah, it was just so interesting, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read in the month, the book that I read before that was Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching. Also, sorry if you can hear like random noises or anything. My window is open because it's like actually really nice out today, even though it's October. Anyway, this was a really gothic British book. It was written in like the late 2000s, I think, or maybe early 2010s. So like it's pretty, I don't know, it's kind of dated. Something that I mentioned in my like Goodreads review of this is that if this was released in 2020 or something like that, like everyone would have thought that it was about Brexit. Because one of the biggest themes in this book is like the idea of the outsider, the idea of the immigrant and the foreigner. In this book, we are following this house that's in Dover, and we're following a generation of like 3 generations of women. The grandmother, mother, and daughter, basically. There's like a couple main characters in this book, but there's like 3 maybe. There's a set of twins, fraternal twins, one that's a girl, one that's a boy, Miri and Elliot. And then there's a third character named Ore, who is an adopted Nigerian child, like kid. There's like multiple timelines throughout the story, and it's sort of like written in this really piecemeal way, and it's like not chronological, obviously, and it's very dreamy, but it's also like a really rich, dense text. Like it's very much playing on a lot of tropes from text in like the literary canon, and it's like, so it's really dense and it's really, really smart, but like it is, I don't know, like it wasn't that engaging for me personally because of how dark and dense and heavy it was. It was fairy tale-like in some ways, in the way that all Oyeyemi books are, but it was so well written, but like it just wasn't really my thing, so I rated it 3 stars. The book that I read before that was The Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin, And this book is another sort of magical realism book, but like the other ones that I read, I think magical realism is like a theme in the books that I read in October, as is like 3-star ratings, because this book I also gave 3 stars. This is more fantasy. It's like more on the fantasy end of magical realism because it's about this like school of magic, but the magic is all elemental and seasonal because in this world it's like set in the contemporary world, except if this world and all of human history existed alongside the presence of witches, and these witches were all like, witches gender neutral, like anyone can be a witch, but these witches have control of or have power in accordance to a season. But our main character is obviously an ever witch, meaning she has power in every season. So she goes to this school for witches. Basically there's environmental collapse, as you know, happening globally. There's this sort of need for witches' magic to help balance out like the environment and the universe basically, and the earth and the planet, balance all of that out and just try to work against environmental destruction. But our main character like really hates the fact that she has the power of witchcraft because it has damaged a lot of people in her life. It's killed her parents and it's killed one of her best friends because her magic is just so strong that it seeks out the people that she loves most and like harms them. So she really hates her magic, but she's the only ever witch like that exists in the world at that point. And there's this sort of effort of like training her to become very powerful to help in natural disasters, but she doesn't want to do that because she would end up hurting the people that she loves, she thinks. So she wants to like get rid of her magic, be stripped, but then obviously this boy comes into her life and like something, it's a very classic like love story, like accepting yourself for who you are story, and taking grasps on your magical powers sort of stuff. And like I liked the magic system, I thought it was fun, I thought it was really cute, and I think this whole book was very whimsical, and because it was so nature grounded, like the descriptions and stuff of the magic was so lush and beautiful to imagine, as were the campgrounds. The school had like rolling hills that the witches could practice their witchcraft on, and there were a lot of like really emotionally compelling scenes. But like as a book in its entirety, it wasn't really my thing, mostly because again the predictable nature of the plot and also sort of the inherent like cheesiness of the premise, and also sort of like the inherent cheesiness of the premise of the story, and the fact that like something that Brandon Sanderson actually talks about in one of his lectures. He's one of my favorite authors of all time, as he is for any fantasy reader. He talks about how there are a lot of like interesting implications involved with creating magic systems that are genetic, that are like stuff that you're born with basically. And because this magic system in this world is something that you're born with, and if you aren't born with it, you just don't, you can't have it, but like if you are born with it, there's a way for you to be able to get rid of it, but like it involves a lot of pain and suffering. I don't know, like I just thought there was something inherently very juvenile about it, and in fact this whole book felt kind of juvenile to me, even though it dealt with very adult themes. There's sexual stuff in here, there's a lot of talks about death and grief, and it's also like sapphic because the main character's ex is one of the girls on campus who is another witch, a winter witch, and also like the season for which the witch like operates under, and the magic that they possess it sort of impacts their personality, and also as the seasons change, it impacts their personalities as well. And that's another thing that the Everwitch, our main character, has to deal with, is the fact that most of her love and most of her romantic life experiences have been cut short, because during the summer is when she feels the most love. But then once fall comes, like those feelings just kind of go away due to the nature of the seasons changing. So yeah, I thought that this was fun and sweet and sentimental and whimsical, but too much so in some ways, in some directions. Like not exactly for me, but there's definitely people out there who this book is definitely something that they would really enjoy. So the book that I read before that was The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling, and Caitlin Starling wrote one of my favorite books of the year so far, Yellow Jessamine, which is a novella, and this book is a full-length novel. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. It's very gothic, it's very Victorian, and it's about this woman named Jane Lawrence, obviously, who gets married to this guy who's a doctor, and he seems to be just an eligible bachelor, and she's looking for like a quiet, calm marriage, something that can get her away from the traumas of her past, because this is set after the Great War, World War One, and her parents, I think, died. Or was it World War One? It might be World War Two. Wait. Then it's not Victorian. Anyway, it has Victorian vibes, if that makes sense. It's like British and like dark and like set in the moors or whatever, you know? Our main character is dealing with a lot of grief and trauma, and after she gets married to this doctor dude, he tells her that she can't stay with him at his like family house, his family's estate, and she's like, okay, that's kind of weird, but okay. Also, they're like strangers, and she presents to him, okay, let's get married. And he's like, are you sure about that? And she's like, yes, let's do it. And they eventually do, but they literally knew each other for like 2 days before they got married. But as they get married, they realize that they kind of actually like each other and have feelings for each other. And so when the night of their wedding, Jane gets stranded because of a storm, instead of going back to town, she just walks back to the house and is like, can I stay with you? But when she gets into this house, weird stuff starts happening. First, she opens the door to her husband. Like, no one's answering the door. It's very Beauty and the Beast. Like, she walks in and she's like, hello? And no one's there. And so she finally goes up to this guy's, like, room, and he opens the door and he looks at her as if he has seen an apparition, as if she is a fucking ghost. And she's like, oh, okay, that's weird. But eventually things work out, and then she kind of stays there for a little bit. But the longer she stays there, the more she realizes that things are kind of weird. She starts seeing ghosts, and, like, there might be magic, and there's, like, these other doctors sort of come, and they perform some sort of magic rituals, maybe. It's very weird. Things just start getting weird. And that's what I love about this. It's weird, it's dark, it's magical, but in ways that like you really cannot expect. And it's ghostly, it's gothic, and it's so rooted in this house and sort of the complicated relationships that people have with each other. There's this other doctor character who is sort of like in charge of the insane asylum, kind of, and she is involved in this in some way. Anyway, I just thought this book was fascinating, and I really, really enjoyed it, so I rated it 4 stars. And it is like sort of an unconventional haunted house story, and I think Gabby Reeds was talking about how she likes unconventional haunted house stories, so I would recommend this book for it. I don't know if you would like it, but like, because of how kind of weird it is, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. The book that I read right before that was A Spindle, Splintered by Alix E. Harrow. Thank you so much to Sage Agi. I don't know how to say their last name. Thank you to Sage for sending me this arc. I really enjoyed this. I rated it 4 stars because it's sort of a sapphic retelling of A Sleeping Beauty that has to do with a main character who suffers from chronic illness. It's a specific like made up type of, it's not something that exists in real life, but because it's like a novella, it's really short, and this kind of has to do with like a multiverse and like saving other women. It's like a feminist fairy tale. It's really fun, and it kind of reminded me of one of my favorite books of the year, Princess Floralinda and the 40 Flight Tower, by Thames and Muir, but this wasn't as good, so not a 5-star read, 4-star read. It's very funny and lighthearted at some points, but also deals with a lot of like kind of dark things, and basically all the main characters are women, and I think that's fun and awesome, and it has a lot of like feminist themes and themes around friendship and love. The book that I read before that was The Awakening of Sunshine Girl by Paige Mckenzie. This book is a sequel, so I can't really tell you much about it, but yeah, I rated it 2 stars. I didn't really like it, honestly. Yeah. The book that I read right before that was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, and honestly, like, this cover is, like, creepy as hell, and, like, it kind of threw me off because when I first started the book, I was like, this is not sounding that creepy so far. But then you get into it, and it's like, damn. This book, I kind of described it in my Goodreads review as Midsummer, but in Japan, because it's about this group of friends that have sort of a tense relationship with each other that has to do with like some drama in their recent past and some trauma in their recent past. They all like come to this abandoned house, abandoned castle in Japan to spend like someone's honeymoon or something. And when they get there, there's weird shit, haunted shit that starts happening, and it's like a scary story, sort of horror trope stuff that happens. And yeah, I mean, I thought this book was really interesting, but I didn't digest it well enough for me to be able to like get anything from it, really, so that's kind of my fault. I need to reread this, evidently, but yeah, I rated it 3 stars. The book that I read before that was the first book in the Haunting of Sunshine Girl series, because I already talked about the sequel to it, and this was kind of fun, honestly. I rated it 3.5 stars, which is why I even read the sequel in the first place, because I thought it would be like fun and campy the way this book was, but it really wasn't, and that was disappointing for me. But this was also published in like the mid-2010s, like 2015, I think, and that sort of explains a lot of the things I didn't like in this book. The sort of like romance element, I mean, I think the supernatural horror part of this book was really fun, and the way that magic, horror, and creepiness played out in this, and the sort of oscillating points of views and narratives that kind of meet at a certain point, I thought was interesting, and the sort of magic system that gets developed here, I thought that was really interesting and fun. But there were a lot of points that I was like really annoyed at our main character for being that sort of typical young adult white girl protagonist, and the love interest being like the typical mousy, nerdy, but very cute boy. Like, I don't know, it just fell into some tropes that I didn't really mind in the first book, but got really bad on my nerves in the second book. But yeah, so I rated this book 3.5 stars. I thought it was fun, and it was a good transitional book for me, I think. The book that I finished right before that was Swamplandia by Karen Russell, and honestly, I kind of hated this book. I rated it 2 stars. This book is a really dense text. Like, it is kind of difficult to read, and for a lot of reasons. But basically, in this book, we're following this family that live in like the Everglades, like live on this tiny island out in Florida, and they run an alligator amusement park, an alligator wrestling amusement park. But that's at the very beginning of the book. By the end of the first chapter, it's like basically fallen to ruin because the main attraction was their mother, and she died of cancer. And so their amusement park is falling apart, and everything is going badly. There's a massive amounts of debt that needs to be paid off, and the father is like spiraling. The house is becoming a fucking mess with no one taking care of it, and all these kids it's crazy, right? Our main character, I would argue, is Ava Bigtree, who is 13 years old, and we kind of get her perspective throughout the entirety of this book, but her sister is kind of experiencing some sort of like having some like relationship with the ghost, and her older brother is super disillusioned by all of this and wants to get off the island and become like a normal kid and go work and whatever, but when he actually does that, he realizes like he doesn't know shit about shit, and their dad, again, like he's kind of off the rails. So everyone in this book is absolutely off the rails, and also they're all like appropriating Native American culture and like a really crude idea of it. So it was sort of a look at pathetic people's lives, at people who are suffering greatly, and the sort of gothic, southern, swampy element and environment involved with all of this, and the way that it creates a sort of like relationship with the environment and the text and these characters. So I thought this book was wild and not always really in a good way. So I just really did not have a good time reading this book. Like every time I sat down to read it, I was like, I don't like this. But again, it was really densely written. It's a really rich text, but just not really my thing. I don't know, and like I think it's really problematic in some ways, but also it's like these problematic characters, not necessarily the author herself. I don't know, I wasn't the biggest fan, so yeah, I rated this 2 stars. The book that I read right before that was like a really short romance novel that had a unicorn involved with it, and that book was called Pure by Kim Alexander. This is just a unicorn porn book. It's basically about this woman who saves this unicorn guy, and they like have a relationship. It was really short, and it was kind of camp and like lighthearted and quirky, and I rated it 3 stars. There's not really much to say about it. If you're the kind of person who like enjoys a monster romance or enjoys like a creature romance, this could be your thing, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know. The book that I read right before that was Horrid by Katrina Leno. This book was really good. I rated it 4.5 stars, which is interesting because it's a young adult horror novel, which I didn't have that high of expectations going into it anyways, and also the cover is so beautiful. I wish I had a physical copy of this book. The same way that I wish I had a physical copy of All's Well. Like, the hardcovers of both of these books are so beautiful. Anyway, in Horrid, we're following this girl who moves from California to Seattle with her mom because her dad died, and her mom is, like, they can't pay off the mortgage on their house, so they sell it, and they move into her mom's childhood house. And her mom does not, like, no one likes the fact that they're moving into her mom's childhood house, but there's something not right about it, and it's kind of giving haunted house vibes, right? And basically, this girl moves into this small town, and it's weird because there seems to be some open hostility from certain people. There seems to be a history of the town and of the people in it that is not really being said, and there seems to be a ghost in her room and a haunting. Like, this book was really interesting in the way that it unfolded and the way that events revealed themselves and the way that the relationships played out. And I thought that it was really masterfully done in a way that was really applicable to young adult as a genre and audience, and I really enjoyed it. And it was definitely very creepy and very vivid in terms of its imagery, especially towards the end. I really enjoyed this, so would definitely recommend. The book that I read right before this was Payback's A Witch by Lana Harper, which is another sapphic witch book. And this book I thought was pretty fun. I rated it 3.5 stars. I rounded it up to like 4 on Goodreads. And this book is about this girl who goes back to her small town, very Gilmore Girls vibes, because there is like a witch tournament happening, a magic tournament happening. She is one of the descendants of like the 4 magical families in this town. Every year for like the past, like centuries or whatever, each one of these houses like would bring forth one of their, the eldest child or whatever to go like compete in this sort of magical tournament, and whoever wins said tournament gets like a higher level of magical power for their family and money and fame, kind of basically like that. But this douchebag guy who is our main character's ex, who is kind of the person who like chased her out of town in the first place, he's competing for one of the houses, but his house, his family is like really fucked up. They're like buying out all the property, and it's, they're trying to monopolize on that shit. And this girl from another family, from like the creepy, dark, like sort of Addams Family types vibes, like dark magic type family, is there, and she's really hot, and they develop this like relationship, kind of. This book kind of had similar issues in terms of the things that I had issues with in The Nature of Witches, where like the magic was really particular, right? Each one of these families have a particular type of magic, and our main character comes from the family that has arguably like the weakest type of magic, because she is like the arbiter of the tournament. She judges it fairly because like the spirit of the arbiter of the tournament like comes into her, and like she knows all the rules and she can't break them, she can't be biased in any way. And so basically she and her childhood best friend, who is a witch from one of the other houses, the girl that she's sleeping with, and then her childhood best friend, who ended up dating the douchebag ex when she was out of town, they start collaborating, like all 3 of them all together, to team up against this douchebag ex guy to like win the tournament. One of them winning the tournament instead of him. This book was very fun and like sweet, but again, the romance and the plot line and sort of the push of this book was very predictable, and I liked reading about the games and I liked reading about the scheming, but the relationship honestly kind of exhausted me and made me roll my eyes, so that's kind of sad for me. Like, I like sapphic romances, and I wish they were written better, to be honest, like just generally, because this, I don't know, it wasn't really giving, So yeah, I thought it was fun, and I thought it was cute, but like a little corny. So the book that I read right before that was Deadly Summer Nights by Vicki Delaney, and this book is like set in the 50s at this resort that is run by this woman and her mother, who's like an aged out Broadway star, and they are competing against like one of the other resorts in the Catskills in like upstate New York, and there's a murder that happens on their grounds, and there's a whole investigation, and there's a lot of like McCarthyism in this book, a lot of like Red Scare shit, like, oh, the communists, whatever. So that was kind of annoying for me, but generally I liked this mystery. I thought that it was fun, I thought that it was camp, and I like the 50s vibes of it all. So yeah, I rated it 3.5 stars. I thought that I had a good time, like I giggled, I laughed, I thought that it was written in an interesting way. Kind of reminded me of like Fortune Favors the Dead, but like not as good because it's not like queer and like, I don't know. It's historical fiction, but it wasn't as compelling to me as Stephen Spotswood's Fortune Favors the Dead, which was like one of my favorite books of last year. Anyway, like I'm always looking for books that remind me of that. Like every time I find a thriller or a mystery that I like love, like I'm just always searching for the next book that can give me the same kick, the same high that that book gave me, the same like vibes and genre, if that makes sense. The book that I read right before that was The Postscript Murders by Elly Griffiths. This book, I honestly don't even remember what the fuck happened in it. I rated it 3 stars though, so like, I don't know. I think like I kept on falling asleep while reading this, so I can't really give you a good review of this book, but I do remember it being kind of funny, kind of camp, and having to do with like some sort of private investigator, I think. I don't know. The book that I read right before that was Goblin by Josh Malerman, and it's sort of like a compilation of novellas and short stories all set in the town of Goblin. And I didn't really like this horror. I gave it 3 stars. It kind of gave me like mediocre white man horror vibes, and I just wasn't really living for it. I think that it wasn't that scary. I think a lot of the stories were just not that creative, honestly. So, yeah. 3 stars, but like a meh 3 stars, maybe like a 2.5, you know? But like, I gave it a 3 because I thought that the way that it was structured was kind of creative, but that's about the extent of like, I don't know, the writing was like fine, I guess, but it just really wasn't my thing per se. I feel like very few like white men can like write a horror novel that is like good, because like what is more horrifying than like men, you know? Anyway, the book that I read right before that was Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune, and I love T.J. Klune. Well, no, that's not true, because I've only read, like, one of his books, which was The House on the Cerulean Sea, that everyone loved last year. This is another, like, queer, fluffy book that has, like, kind of dark themes, because Under the Whispering Door is about death, because we're following this guy who is a total asshole, like, corporate lawyer. His whole career was screwing people over. He dies of a heart attack, and then he gets brought over to this house that is sort of the in-between place for people who've died, and so their spirits and ghost selves like kind of go there, and they need to pass to the other side, but like there are these people who kind of try and help make the process of transitioning to the other side to death like easier, and so there's a sort of sweet queer found family going on there. But I thought this book was kind of corny in some ways, obviously because it's dealing with like, you know, death and grief and, you know, these really sentimental things about like finding love and self-acceptance finally after, you know, a whole life living something where you're so isolated. And our main character is bi, and there's a love story going on that I thought was really sweet. One of the issues I had with this book was how our author, who is white, wrote some of the characters of color. The love interest is black, and his grandfather like is a ghost and lives in the house, and he's such a fun character. Love him. There's also a ghost dog who was really sweet, but there's also this Chinese girl who can like interact with and see ghosts but isn't a ghost herself. I don't know, I think there were elements of a lot of these characters' personalities and stuff that I was like, is this kind of stereotypy? Is this kind of writing in a way that like I personally am not a fan of? Maybe, but that takes away from this book only like a little bit for me. I still thought it was really sweet, and I cried a bunch of times while reading it, so yeah, I rated it 4.5 stars. The book that I read right before that was Assembly by Natasha Brown. This is a very short book, and it's a new release. It's about this black woman who has sort of ascended the realms of British social class. She has a generationally wealthy boyfriend, and she's going over to his family's house for like a dinner with his parents. She's meeting his family for the first time. And this book is ultimately like a literary fiction at stream of consciousness about like a woman who is dealing with the privilege of her position but also the suffering of her position and her thoughts on the things that she's experiencing. This book very much gives like autofiction, because I think the woman who wrote this book went to Cambridge, majored, like has a math degree, worked in corporate finance, and so I think a lot of this is drawing on her own experiences and thoughts. But yeah, I thought that it was really, really well written, and I rated it 4 stars. The book that I read right before that was another sort of European woman vibes type of book, like depressed millennial moving, DWM, depressed woman moving book, and that book was Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. This book is about this woman who worked at The Hague as a translator, and sort of the interactions that she has, like in terms of her friendships, her work life, her love life, the way all of these things converge. I thought this book was really smart and very interesting and really compelling, and again, another like DWM millennial contemporary woman trying to deal with the complexities of her life and herself. Yeah, I thought this was a really solid book. I rated it like 3.5 stars, 4 stars. The book that I read right before that was The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. This book I rated 3 stars. It kind of gave me like middle grade vibes, but it definitely isn't. Like, it's definitely either young adult or adult. It's set in, I think, Ireland, and I think our main character is Black or Caribbean. I don't remember. And she is this teenage girl who's like just trying to make money to survive, and her hustle is talking to ghosts and connecting the ghost messages to like their living sort of like relatives and stuff. And then she ends up getting involved in this like secret ghost society, this like elite society. She's really just struggling to get by and like just scraping day by day to have enough money to live. And so yeah, I just thought this book was fun and an adventure and a wild ride, but not necessarily to my tastes, I guess. I thought it was like funny and sweet at points, and also, you know, gritty and compelling. It was like okay for me. The book that I read right before that was New Teeth by Simon Rich, and I love this book. I rated it like 4.5, 5 stars. It was really, really funny. A collection of short stories that are all very humorous, and they all have either like a fantastical or speculative or contemporary realistic like edge, and every single one of these stories was just, I don't know, they like got to me. They were sweet, sentimental, but also just hilarious. I really like this, to be honest. Like, I haven't read anything as simultaneously silly and like touching as this like ever before. The range of characters and stories and settings that this collection kind of portrayed was just, I don't know, it really spoke to me. So yeah, love that one. And finally, the first book that I finished in the month of October was The Queue by Basma Abdel-Aziz. This book was sort of a speculative fiction, magical realism type of story that was like a retelling of quote-unquote the Arab Springs in Egypt, following the perspective of a couple different characters in different walks of life, grappling with different issues and experiences. And yeah, I thought that this was really smart and really intelligent, and written in this writing style was kind of like removed and unsentimental. I think that makes sense considering the author used to be or is a journalist and also an artist of many other forms. So yeah, I thought this book was very interesting, very intelligent, and I rated it like 3.5 stars, 4 stars. This book was like a waking nightmare, because the things that this characters were experiencing was very nightmare-like, but it's reality, you know? So yes, those were all the books that I read in the month of October. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that bullshit. And let me know if any of these books that I've read in October were on your radar, if you've read them and what your thoughts were, or if any of these books are things that you want to check out now. So yeah, and also sorry for the continuation of like weird background noise throughout this video. Dude, I don't know. That is all that I have for you today. I will see you in my next video. Bye!